It was just another hot afternoon in the small town. The sun hung heavy in the sky, beating down on the narrow streets and the rows of modest shops that lined them. In one corner of the town, there was a tiny repair shop barely bigger than a garage. Inside, a mechanic wiped the sweat from his brow, carefully checking the engine of a rusty old car. His hands were covered in grease and his overalls carried the scent of oil and metal. He had been working this way for years, quietly, humbly, never asking for much, just trying to make enough to pay the bills and keep the shop running. The shop was quiet, almost too quiet. Birds chirped outside, and a gentle breeze stirred the dust on the floor. The mechanic was used to these slow, ordinary days, but today, something different was coming. A loud, deep rumble echoed down the street, making the floor vibrate under his feet. He looked up, curious, and his eyes widened. The sound grew louder, more powerful, until a huge motorcycle appeared at the corner, gleaming under the sunlight. It was unlike anything the mechanic had seen in person before. The engine roared like a living creature, and the rider looked larger than life. The biker pulled up slowly in front of the shop. He wore black leather from head to toe, and his jacket carried a strange emblem on the back. Tattoos peeked out from under his sleeves, and his face carried an expression that made the mechanic pause. He was intimidating for sure, and there was something in his presence that made the shop feel smaller, almost suffocating. For a moment, the mechanic considered hiding behind the car he was working on, but he reminded himself that he had nothing to hide and nothing to fear as long as he stayed calm. The biker swung his leg over the side of the motorcycle and landed firmly on the ground. The boots made a heavy thud and the engine settled into a quiet purr. He walked toward the mechanic, who instinctively straightened his back, wiped his hands, and tried to look confident even though his stomach churned with nervousness. The biker stopped a few feet away and pointed to his bike. "It's acting up," he said, his voice deep and steady, carrying a weight that made the words feel like commands. "I need it checked out." The mechanic nodded slowly, trying to appear casual. "Sure, I can take a look," he said, gesturing toward the bike. Inside, his mind raced. He had heard stories about bikers like him, stories that were equal parts terrifying and fascinating. Yet something in the biker's eyes told him that this wasn't about trouble. It was about the bike. Still, he felt the tension. The mechanic had seen many customers in his life, but never anyone like this. He circled the motorcycle, examining it carefully. The machine was powerful, well-built, and clearly cared for by its owner, but something in the engine was off. He could see the problem immediately: a loose chain and a small leak in the oil line. Nothing that a few careful adjustments couldn't fix. He took a deep breath and gestured toward the tools hanging on the wall. "I can fix this," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Shouldn't take long." The biker nodded once and leaned against the bike, arms crossed, watching. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the quiet hum of the shop and the faint ticking from the motorcycle's engine. The mechanic rolled up his sleeves and began working. Sweat ran down his face as he tightened bolts, replaced worn parts, and carefully adjusted the chain. He could feel the biker's eyes on him the entire time, and he knew that one wrong move could be noticed immediately. Every detail mattered. Minutes turned into half an hour, and still he worked without asking for payment. He had thought about it for a moment. He could charge a lot for this kind of service, but something about the biker's presence made him decide otherwise. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was just the quiet principle of helping someone in need. When the final bolt was tightened and the engine hummed smoothly again, the mechanic stepped back, wiping his hands on his overalls. The biker started the engine. The roar was deep, powerful, but there was no unusual noise. The bike purred perfectly, smooth and strong. The biker looked at the mechanic, and for the first time there was a hint of a smile. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but the mechanic saw it. The tension in the room eased slightly. "It's good," the biker said simply. He pulled out a folded bill from his pocket, but then hesitated. Instead of handing it over, he looked at the mechanic and nodded once. "Keep it," he said. "You did good work." The mechanic was taken aback. He had never had anyone refuse payment for service before, especially not someone like this. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The biker smiled faintly, swung his leg over the bike, and with a roar of the engine drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a lingering sense of amazement. For a few minutes, the mechanic just stood there, staring at the empty street where the biker had disappeared. His hands were still greasy, his heart was still racing, but he couldn't stop smiling. Something had happened today that was different from all the ordinary days. He had faced something intimidating and come through with honesty and skill, and somehow that had been enough. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the town. People who came into the shop over the next few days asked questions, eager to hear the story. Some warned him that helping bikers could be dangerous, that not everyone in their group was friendly. Others nodded in admiration, praising his courage and his talent. The mechanic listened quietly, shrugging off the warnings, but he couldn't deny that he felt a small twinge of nervousness. He had no idea what might happen next. Meanwhile, the biker had returned to his group, telling his friends about the mechanic who had fixed his bike without asking for money. The story grew with each telling, spreading through the network of riders. His friends were impressed not just by the skill but by the honesty, the courage, and the calm in the face of intimidation. They decided that this mechanic was someone worth respecting, someone worth visiting again. Back at the shop, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but there was a sense of anticipation in the air. The mechanic continued his daily work, fixing cars, changing oil, and repairing engines. But his thoughts often drifted to the biker and the unexpected encounter. Every time he heard a motorcycle engine rumble in the distance, his ears perked up. Every shadow that passed by the windows made him glance up, half expecting to see the biker return. He wondered what the future might hold, and whether this small act of kindness would lead to more. Days passed, and the mechanic started noticing small signs. The sound of engines in the distance, a pair of headlights lingering a little longer than usual, motorcycles parked across the street. His curiosity grew alongside a quiet sense of pride. He had done something simple. He had repaired a bike, but somehow it felt important. It felt like the start of something bigger than he could have imagined. At night, he would close the shop, walk home, and think about the day the biker had arrived. He remembered the roar of the engine, the strength in the biker's gaze, the brief smile, and the nod of respect. He realized that in that short encounter, he had proven something, to himself and to others. Honesty, skill, and courage had a power all their own. They could break barriers even between strangers who came from very different worlds. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he felt ready. He knew that his life had shifted in a small but meaningful way. Something had changed in the quiet mechanic's life, and the quiet town itself would never be quite the same. Outside, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. Somewhere, the sound of a motorcycle engine rumbled faintly in the distance, a reminder that the world was bigger, stranger, and more connected than it had seemed before. And the mechanic, humble, hard-working, and honest, smiled quietly to himself, ready for whatever came next. The mechanic woke up early the next morning, the events of the previous day still fresh in his mind. He had spent the night thinking about the biker, the roar of the engine, and the way the man had trusted him without hesitation. It was strange to feel proud for simply doing his job honestly, yet he could not shake the warm feeling inside. He knew he had been lucky, but also that something important had begun. Life, he realized, could change in unexpected ways. The day began quietly, just like any other. The mechanic arranged his tools, checked the stock of spare parts, and swept the floor. Customers came in and out, seeking repairs on small vehicles and old cars. He helped them patiently, smiling politely, but his mind often wandered. He kept thinking about the biker and whether he would ever return. Little did he know, the story had already started to spread beyond his shop. Word of the mechanic's kindness had traveled fast among the local riders. The Hell's Angel who visited him had spoken to his friends, telling them about the man who had fixed his bike for free and treated him with respect. Within the biker community, trust and reputation mattered greatly, and the Mechanics Act had made a strong impression. Stories were shared over coffee on long rides and during gatherings at garages across the town. Every retelling added weight to his name. Back at the shop, the mechanic noticed small signs that things were changing. A motorcycle passed slowly down the street, its rider glancing toward the shop. Engines rumbled in the distance at odd hours, and once, while checking a car, he saw a lone biker park a little way off and stare quietly, before riding away. The mechanic felt a mixture of excitement and worry. He had never dealt with so many powerful and intimidating strangers at once. Yet there was something comforting in knowing that they had heard of him and respected him. One afternoon, a young man entered the shop, clearly nervous. He was not dressed like the Hell's Angels yet. but there was a hint of leather in his outfit and the faint smell of motor oil. He introduced himself politely and mentioned that he had heard about the mechanic who had helped a Hell's Angel recently. The young man explained that he had a small bike in need of repair and wanted to know if the mechanic could help. The mechanic smiled and nodded. The act of helping someone in need, no matter who they were, had become his principle. He agreed without hesitation. As he worked on the young man's bike, the mechanic realized that he was becoming more confident. The pressure of knowing that powerful bikers were aware of him did not make him fearful anymore. Instead, it made him more careful and meticulous. He checked every bolt, every chain, every part, ensuring that the bike was repaired perfectly. The young man watched in awe, grateful and respectful, appreciating not only the skill but also the calm, honest way the mechanic worked. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. More bikers came into the shop, some alone, some in pairs. Each visit was quiet and respectful, filled with appreciation and occasional small talk. They asked questions about repairs, shared stories about their rides, and occasionally, they gave small tips for local routes or good motorcycle parts suppliers. The mechanic learned from them, just as they learned from him. It was an exchange built on mutual respect, not intimidation or fear. Despite the growing number of visitors, the mechanic never asked for extra money. He charged fairly for parts and services, but he refused to inflate prices for the bikers who had come because of the first act of kindness. This decision earned him even more respect. In the world of bikers, integrity and honesty carried a different kind of weight than in regular business circles. Soon, the mechanic became known as a man who could be trusted with both machines and people alike. The mechanic also began to notice the way the bikers interacted with the town. At first, locals were nervous, some even gossiping or warning him to be careful. But the bikers were surprisingly polite. They parked their motorcycles neatly, kept their voices low in public, and never caused trouble. They respected the mechanic's space, and slowly, the community started to see them in a different light. What had begun as fear gradually shifted toward curiosity, and eventually a cautious respect. One evening, as the mechanic was closing up shop, he noticed a small group of bikers lingering outside. There were 4 or 5 of them, and they looked relaxed but watchful. One of them approached him, a man with a broad build and a quiet demeanor, and nodded in greeting. "We wanted to thank you again," he said simply, "for helping our friend. We respect your work and we respect you." The mechanic felt a warmth spread through him. No one had ever spoken to him like this, in a way that combined appreciation, respect, and sincerity. He nodded humbly and thanked them, realizing that the small act of fixing a bike without expecting payment had created a bridge between worlds that seemed so different at first glance. Word of these visits traveled further, reaching other towns nearby. Biker clubs started to talk about the mechanic, praising his honesty and skill. Some even joked about lining up at his shop just to see the man who had earned the respect of the Hells Angels. It was incredible to think that such a quiet, ordinary man could gain such recognition, simply by doing his work well and treating people with respect. The mechanic, however, remained humble. He did not chase fame or attention. He continued his daily routine, focusing on each customer, each bike, and each repair with the same care as before. But he could feel the change in the air. Something was happening, something bigger than his little shop or the small town. There was a sense that life was moving in a new direction, and that his small acts of honesty and kindness were starting to create real impact. Late one night, the mechanic was working on a stubborn engine, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows across the floor. He paused for a moment and listened. In the distance, the faint rumble of multiple motorcycles reached his ears. He wiped his hands and walked to the window, peering into the darkness. He could see the headlights approaching slowly, steadily. A wave of realization hit him. This was more than just one visitor returning. Something bigger was coming. The mechanic took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. He thought back to the first encounter, to the roar of the engine, to the nod of respect, and to the sense of trust that had been formed in such a short time. Whatever was coming, he knew he would face it the same way he had faced everything, with honesty, with skill, and with a steady heart. He was ready. Outside, the motorcycles drew closer, engines humming together like a small storm. The mechanic could make out the figures of the bikers, each one unique, yet all connected by the same code of respect and loyalty. They parked neatly outside the shop, forming a line that stretched down the street. It was an impressive sight, both intimidating and awe-inspiring, a testament to the network of people who had come to know him. The mechanic stepped outside, hands still streaked with grease, and greeted them quietly. The bikers nodded in return, their expressions calm and serious, but not hostile. There was an unspoken understanding that passed between them. This was not a scene of threat or confrontation. This was a scene of recognition, of respect, and of mutual appreciation. The mechanic realized that what had started as a single act of kindness had blossomed into something far greater than he could have imagined. He looked down the line of motorcycles, counting at least a dozen of them, each rider waiting patiently, some chatting quietly with their neighbors, others simply observing. He knew that his life was about to change, not just in terms of business, but in terms of connections, trust, and experiences that he had never thought possible. The first visitor had returned, and now, a small army of bikers had arrived to show their respect and to rely on his skill. The mechanic smiled quietly to himself, feeling the weight of the moment. He knew that the days ahead would be busy, challenging, and perhaps even exhausting. But he also knew that he would face them with the same calm, steady approach that had earned him this unexpected recognition. He had built something more valuable than money or fame. He had built trust, respect, and a sense of connection that transcended appearances and reputation. As the night wore on, the mechanic worked tirelessly, repairing bikes, offering advice, and treating each visitor with the same care and respect as the first. The bikers in turn treated him with admiration and gratitude, not only for his skill but also for his character. And in that small, quiet shop in a corner of a quiet town, a remarkable story was unfolding. A story that had begun with a simple act of honesty and had grown into a chain of respect and connection that no one could have predicted. The morning sun rose over the town, casting a golden light on the streets and the small repair shop. The mechanic had arrived early as usual, preparing the tools, checking spare parts, and tidying the workspace. The events of the last few days had left him both excited and cautious. His shop had become known among the biker community, and while that brought a sense of pride, it also brought a quiet tension. He had no idea who might appear next or how large the group might be. By mid-morning, the first signs appeared. The distant roar of motorcycles grew louder, a rhythmic sound that made the ground beneath the shop vibrate slightly. The mechanic looked up from his workbench, his heart beating a little faster. He could see headlights approaching from the main road. This time it wasn't a single visitor or a small pair. It was a group, at least a dozen riders, each one carrying the unmistakable presence of someone used to commanding attention. They slowed as they reached the shop, forming a neat line along the street. The mechanic stepped outside, hands still smeared with grease, and greeted them cautiously. The bikers nodded in response, not aggressively, but with a calm confidence. Their eyes held curiosity and respect, and the air was thick with unspoken understanding. The mechanic could feel the energy, the subtle power of numbers. Yet there was no threat, only the expectation that he would continue to do what he had done before, work honestly and skillfully. The leader of the group, a man with a solid build and a quiet, commanding presence, approached first. He had a few more tattoos than the others, and his jacket bore the emblem that marked his status within the group. He looked the mechanic in the eyes and spoke with a deep, even tone. "We've heard a lot about you. You helped one of our own, and that earns respect. We came to see it for ourselves." The mechanic nodded, keeping his voice steady. "I'll do my best," he said simply. Inside, he felt a mix of nerves and determination. He knew this encounter would be different from the previous ones. The stakes were higher, but he also knew that his integrity and skill had brought him here. There was no reason to falter now. The bikers dismounted their motorcycles carefully, moving with a quiet coordination that suggested years of riding experience. They parked neatly outside, leaving space for others and ensuring that the street remained orderly. The mechanic gestured for them to follow him inside, where he began inspecting the motorcycles one by one. He checked engines, tightened chains, adjusted brakes, and replaced worn-out parts. His hands worked efficiently, and he explained his actions to the riders when they asked questions, maintaining a calm, professional tone. As he worked, he began to notice the subtleties of the group. Despite their imposing appearance, they were patient and attentive. They respected his space, offered words of encouragement, and occasionally shared stories about their rides, the challenges of maintaining their motorcycles, and the roads they had traveled. The mechanic listened carefully, absorbing the knowledge while offering his own insights. Each interaction deepened the mutual respect between them. A few locals had gathered nearby, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The sight of a dozen Hells Angels lined up outside a small town shop was enough to stir gossip and curiosity. Some whispered warnings, concerned about potential trouble, while others simply marveled at the unusual sight. The mechanic noticed them but chose to focus on the task at hand, letting his work speak for itself. Hours passed, and the mechanic moved steadily from one motorcycle to the next. His hands were covered in grease and sweat, but he remained focused. Every bike was different, and every repair required careful attention. He checked for subtle issues that could cause problems on long rides, adjusted engines for optimal performance, and ensured that brakes and lights were functioning perfectly. Each rider who observed him nodded in appreciation, their earlier caution replaced by clear admiration. During a brief pause, the leader approached again. He leaned against a workbench, arms crossed, and observed the mechanic with a thoughtful expression. "You don't just fix bikes," he said. "You understand them. That's rare, and you treat us like people, not trouble. That earns more respect than most of the world gives us." The mechanic nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. It was not just about earning respect. It was about connecting with people who lived a world very different from his own. The recognition was meaningful, not for status or pride, but for the acknowledgement that honesty and skill mattered, even in places where reputation often came before character. As the day moved into the afternoon, the group began to relax, chatting quietly among themselves while the mechanic continued his work. The shop buzzed with energy, a mix of engines, laughter, and the occasional clink of tools. The mechanic felt a sense of rhythm, a connection to the group that went beyond business. They were visitors, yes, but they were also witnesses to his dedication, and in return, they were offering him a glimpse into their world. A younger rider, clearly newer to the group, asked the mechanic questions about maintenance, lubrication, and the best ways to keep a bike running smoothly over long distances. The mechanic explained patiently, using simple terms and clear demonstrations. The young rider listened intently, nodding and taking mental notes. It was a small moment, but it highlighted the human connection at the heart of the day. Knowledge shared, trust built, and respect earned through honest work. By late afternoon, the majority of the repairs were complete. The leader walked around the shop, inspecting the work and nodding approvingly. "Everything looks solid," he said. "You've done well. We'll remember this, and we'll make sure others do too." The mechanic felt a quiet pride. He had faced a larger group than before, intimidating in their size and presence, yet he had maintained his focus, integrity, and composure. He had proven to himself that his work mattered, not just for the motorcycles, but for the people who relied on him. This was more than business. It was about connection, trust, and respect. The bikers began to prepare to leave, revving their engines one by one. The mechanic stepped outside, waving them off. They returned the gesture, some nodding, others giving a small thumbs up. The rumble of engines filled the street as they rode away, leaving behind a sense of awe, respect, and a lingering energy that seemed to settle into the very walls of the shop. After they had gone, the mechanic stood for a moment, listening to the fading sound of motorcycles in the distance. His hands were still greasy, his back tired, but his heart was light. He knew that life had shifted in a significant way. The shop was no longer just a place of quiet work. It had become a place of trust, connection, and mutual respect, bridging worlds that had seemed distant and separate before. That evening, he closed the shop and walked home slowly, reflecting on the day. He thought about the first biker who had arrived days ago, the small act of kindness that had set everything in motion, and the dozen riders who had come to see him today. Each interaction had reinforced a lesson he already believed in. Honesty, skill, and respect could create bonds stronger than fear or intimidation. And sometimes, a single moment of integrity could ripple outward, touching lives in ways one could never predict. As he lay down that night, he could still hear the faint echo of engines in the distance. It was a reminder that the world was bigger, more complex, and more connected than he had imagined, and in the quiet of his modest home, he smiled, ready for whatever came next. knowing that his work and his character had begun to leave a mark far beyond the walls of his little repair shop. The following morning, the mechanic arrived at his shop feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Word had spread even further, and he had a quiet sense that today might be different. The first visitors from yesterday had left behind a trail of stories, and now there was a growing anticipation that more bikers would come. As he opened the doors, he noticed a faint rumble in the distance, the sound of multiple engines approaching. It wasn't long before a larger crowd appeared, at least 20 or 30 riders. Their motorcycles lined the street outside, engines purring or idling quietly, a powerful display of presence. The mechanic felt a twinge of anxiety but quickly pushed it aside. He had faced intimidating riders before, and he knew that the key was to stay calm, focused, and honest. His shop might have seemed small and ordinary, but it was a place where skill and integrity mattered more than appearances. The bikers dismounted with ease, moving together yet respecting each other's space. The leader of the group, the same man from before, stepped forward, nodding at the mechanic. "We've heard about your work and we've brought some of our friends to see for themselves," he said. "They'll be waiting for your help." The mechanic nodded quietly. "I'll do my best," he said, already rolling up his sleeves. Inside he felt the pressure, but he also felt a growing sense of purpose. He knew this was more than just fixing motorcycles. It was about earning trust, maintaining respect, and proving that honesty and skill could bridge worlds. The day began in a whirlwind of activity. Riders came forward one by one, explaining the issues with their bikes, asking questions, or simply observing as the mechanic worked. Some engines needed adjustments, chains needed tightening, brakes required care, and tires were inspected for wear. The mechanic moved efficiently from one bike to the next, his hands steady and precise, his explanations clear and patient. Even under the weight of dozens of eyes watching, he did not falter. As he worked, he began to notice subtle patterns. The bikers were different from what he had imagined. Their appearances might have been intimidating, tattoos, leather jackets, and a stern demeanor, but their behavior was polite, respectful, and thoughtful. They helped each other with small tasks, moved carefully around the shop, and listened attentively when he spoke. It was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that respect often came from understanding and kindness. Local residents began to notice the unusual gathering. Some walked slowly past the shop, curious and a little wary. Others stopped at a distance, watching silently as the mechanic moved among the motorcycles, his hands working tirelessly to repair and adjust. Rumors spread quickly through the town about the man who had earned the respect of so many bikers in such a short time. The mechanic, however, remained focused on his work, paying little attention to the whispers. He knew that the task at hand mattered far more than gossip. A younger rider approached, clearly eager to learn. His bike had a minor issue, and he asked the mechanic to explain the repair process. The mechanic demonstrated carefully, explaining each step in simple terms. The young rider listened intently, nodding and asking questions. Their interaction drew the attention of a few other riders who began asking their own questions, curious about the details of maintenance and repair. Slowly, a sense of community began to form, even in the midst of what could have been chaos. Hours passed, and the mechanic's hands became sore, his back tired, and his clothes covered in grease. Yet he did not complain. He continued moving from one bike to another, ensuring each repair was thorough and precise. The bikers, in turn, expressed appreciation, offering quiet nods, thanks, or small gestures of respect. Their presence had the effect of motivating him, pushing him to maintain the same level of dedication he had shown from the very beginning. During a short break, the leader walked around, observing the work and the interactions. He spoke to a few riders, offering guidance and encouragement, but his eyes often returned to the mechanic. "You handle this well," he said quietly. "Not many could manage so many at once and still maintain quality and respect. You've earned our trust." The mechanic felt a warm sense of satisfaction. He had worked hard, not for praise or recognition, but for the simple principle of doing what was right. Now that effort was acknowledged in a meaningful way. The bikers respected not just his skill, but his integrity, his patience, and his ability to stay calm under pressure. It was a recognition he had never expected, and it filled him with pride. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere in the shop shifted. Conversations became livelier. Laughter mixed with the occasional clink of tools and a sense of camaraderie developed. Riders shared stories from their travels, tips for maintenance, and advice on routes to take. The mechanic listened, occasionally offering his own observations or tips, creating a flow of knowledge and mutual respect. The shop, once quiet and solitary, had transformed into a hub of connection, learning, and appreciation. Outside, the street had become a line of parked motorcycles, drawing curious glances from townspeople. Some residents walked by, marveling at the sight, while others whispered stories about the man who had won the respect of the Hells Angels. The mechanic continued his work unfazed by the attention. He focused on each rider, each motorcycle, and each problem with the same care as before. He knew that the strength of this day lay not in the number of visitors, but in the integrity and dedication he brought to every interaction. As evening approached, the majority of repairs were completed. The leader of the group walked up to the mechanic once more. "You've done well today," he said, his voice calm and approving. "We'll make sure others know of your work and we'll continue to come when needed. You've earned more than respect, you've earned loyalty." The mechanic nodded humbly, feeling the weight of the words. Loyalty, respect, trust. These were things he had never sought, yet they had been given freely because he had stayed true to himself. The bikers prepared to leave, engines starting in a synchronized rhythm that echoed through the town. The mechanic stepped outside, waving as they departed, and watched as the group rode away, leaving behind a trail of admiration, gratitude, and a deep sense of accomplishment. After the last bike had disappeared down the road, the mechanic leaned against the shop wall, taking a moment to breathe. His hands were sore, his body tired, but his spirit felt lighter than ever. He had faced the challenge of dozens of riders, managed their expectations, and maintained his calm, steady approach throughout the day. It was a reminder that integrity and skill could create bonds that were stronger than fear or intimidation. And that trust, once earned, could bridge worlds that seemed far apart. That night, the mechanic closed the shop and walked home slowly, reflecting on the day. He thought about the first biker who had arrived, the small act of kindness that had started everything, and the growing community that had formed around his work. Each interaction had reinforced a truth he already believed in. Honesty, dedication, and respect could open doors, create connections, and leave a mark far beyond what one might imagine. As he lay in bed, he could still hear the faint echoes of motorcycle engines in the distance. It was a reminder that the world was larger and more connected than he had ever thought. He smiled quietly to himself, ready for whatever came next, knowing that his work and character had begun to build something remarkable. The small repair shop in the quiet town had become a place of trust, community, and mutual respect, and the mechanic, humble and skilled, had proven that integrity and courage could truly change lives. The morning was crisp, the air carrying a gentle chill that hinted at the end of summer. The mechanic arrived at his shop as usual, his mind calm but alert. The last few days had been extraordinary, filled with unexpected visitors, engines roaring, and the growing presence of bikers who had come to trust and respect him. Today felt different, though. There was a quiet sense in the air, an understanding that what had begun as a single act of kindness had grown into something far bigger than he could have imagined. By mid-morning, the familiar rumble of motorcycles began to fill the streets. One by one they appeared, more than he had ever seen before. Dozens of riders, each one adding to the line of machines stretching down the street. The mechanic felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness, but he reminded himself to stay focused. He had faced challenges before, and he knew that his integrity, skill, and calm demeanor had carried him through. Today, he would rely on the same qualities. The bikers dismounted with care, moving in coordinated fashion, their presence commanding attention without aggression. The leader approached the mechanic, nodding with approval. "We're here again," he said simply, "to show our respect and to rely on your skill. We know you will handle this." There was no pressure in his words, only trust, and the mechanic felt a warm sense of responsibility. He knew this was not about proving himself. It was about continuing the work he had started and maintaining the bonds he had formed. Inside the shop, the scene was lively but organized. Riders came forward one by one, presenting their motorcycles for inspection and repair. The mechanic moved efficiently, checking engines, adjusting brakes, tightening chains, and ensuring every detail was perfect. His hands worked tirelessly, precise and steady, each motion deliberate and practiced. The bikers watched respectfully, some offering advice or sharing their own experiences, creating a flow of knowledge and understanding. Throughout the day, the mechanic noticed how much had changed since the first encounter. The bikers were no longer strangers. They were part of an informal community, connected through respect and shared experience. Conversations flowed easily. Laughter filled the room, and the atmosphere was one of mutual appreciation. The mechanic realized that this was more than a series of repairs. It was the building of relationships, trust, and connection that transcended appearances and reputation. Local residents had gathered at a distance, curious and a little amazed. Some whispered to each other, recounting the story of the mechanic who had earned the respect of the Hells Angels. Others watched silently, recognizing that something remarkable was unfolding. The mechanic remained focused, treating each motorcycle and rider with the same care as the first. It was clear to everyone that his reputation had been earned through skill, patience, and honesty, and that respect could be built through consistent, thoughtful action. As the day progressed, the leader approached again, this time with a small group of riders following. They had come to observe the work, to learn and to offer gratitude. The leader spoke quietly but firmly, his eyes reflecting genuine appreciation. "You've done more than fix bikes," he said. "You've built trust, respect, and understanding. That's rare, and it matters more than anything else. We'll make sure this is known not just among us, but in other places too." The mechanic felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It was not about recognition or reward. It was about the impact of honesty, skill, and kindness. The work he had done had touched lives, built bridges, and created a network of respect that extended beyond the walls of his small shop. He realized that every choice he had made, every careful repair, and every respectful interaction had led to this moment. As the afternoon sun began to dip low in the sky, the mechanic worked on the final motorcycles of the day. His hands were sore, his clothes streaked with grease, and his back ached from hours of focused labor. Yet he felt no regret, only fulfillment. Each bike that rolled smoothly out of the shop was a symbol of trust maintained, a connection strengthened, and respect earned. The bikers prepared to leave, engines roaring to life in a synchronized rhythm that echoed through the town. The mechanic stepped outside, waving them off as they began to ride away. Their nods, gestures, and words of thanks were heartfelt and sincere, a reminder that what had started as a single act of kindness had blossomed into something far more meaningful. The streets returned to quiet, and the shop stood as a testament to the power of integrity, skill, and human connection. Later that evening, the mechanic walked home slowly, reflecting on the journey of the past days. He thought about the first biker who had arrived, the simple act of fixing a bike for free, and how that small decision had led to a chain of events that transformed not only his life, but also the community around him. He realized that respect, trust, and loyalty were not given lightly. They were earned through consistent honesty and dedication. The mechanic paused as he reached his front door, taking a moment to look back at the shop. He felt a quiet pride not in himself but in the values he had upheld and the lives he had touched. He understood now that kindness and skill could open doors, bridge worlds, and create bonds that were deeper and more lasting than fear or intimidation. The shop had become a symbol of that truth, a place where people came together, learned from one another, and discovered that trust and respect mattered more than appearances. That night, as he lay down to sleep, the distant echo of motorcycle engines lingered in his mind. It was a reminder that the world was vast, connected, and full of unexpected possibilities. He smiled quietly, feeling a sense of peace and readiness for whatever came next. The journey had been extraordinary, a testament to the power of human connection, honesty, and skill. The mechanic knew that his life had been changed, not by fame or fortune, but by respect, loyalty, and the simple act of treating others with dignity. Days turned into weeks, and the mechanic continued his work with the same dedication. The bikers returned occasionally, maintaining the bonds that had formed and strengthening the community that had grown around the shop. The story of the small repair shop and the humble mechanic spread further, inspiring others to recognize that integrity, patience, and respect could create meaningful change. The mechanic never sought recognition, but he quietly appreciated the trust and loyalty he had earned. It was a testament to what could happen when skill met kindness, and courage met honesty. The small shop in the quiet town remained as it had always been, a place of work, a place of connection, and a place of respect. The mechanic continued to fix motorcycles, help customers, and maintain his quiet, humble life, but the impact of his actions rippled far beyond the walls of the shop. The bikers who had once been strangers were now allies and friends, bound by mutual respect and shared experience. And in the quiet of the evening, as he closed the shop and walked home, the mechanic understood that true success was not measured in money or recognition, but in the trust, respect, and human connection one could create through honest work and unwavering integrity.